the night maps, unless you are standing under a spotlight, it was so hard to spot opponents with dark skins in dark areas of the dark map.
Yep.
And it led to a lot of complaints and frustration. So eventually they were removed. Post that, the lighting has since been refreshed and refined and reworked, and it's a lot more standardized and easier to spot. And so that's why often when a lot of people say, oh, I miss old Siege, or the elements that they miss of old Siege, a lot of people will cite night maps. And
boom, just like that.
Yeah.
All right, episode number 8 of the Siege Show, presented by Jake and Guzz. It's been another long week of Siege throughout, obviously, the esports side of things. But as usual, we've got sort of other things to discuss before we get into the esports package segment of the show. And today is a very much uplifting kind of day in terms of what we've got to touch on to begin with. The health of Siege and where things are at just continues to keep growing and getting better and better. And I know we've kind of touched on it in previous episodes, but a lot more of that was somewhat hypothetical and more so just looking towards the future. Well, the future feels like it's slowly getting here, and it's like 4 or 5 weeks in a row of positive growth for Siege.
Yeah, the Steam charts are looking really good. Jesse made a tweet, NAL analyst, showing that compared to pretty much this time this month last year, so back in 2022, both the average number of players and the peak number of players has pretty much doubled, which is really, really impressive. And I would hazard to guess that especially on console, that number has probably more than doubled and followed maybe an even more exponential level of growth. So, I mean, that's really good for the game. And look, I kind of feel a little bit vindicated because there felt like a lot of negative sentiment heading into some of the big changes this season. Yet the player number have definitely not reflected that. Now, there could be longer term ramifications and eventually people get fed up with the game mode changes and other stuff. And we then see a dip. But I think so far the player number reflects the state of the game, which outside of the cheater issue and a couple of other big things is actually largely quite positive. And it's obviously good to see because it gives us a bit of job security, I hope. And just in general, the vibes in the community seem to be quite good at the moment.
It's a strange one for me in some ways. Obviously, I know we just had a new chapter sort of come out. We've got a whole bunch of, there's new operators and stuff recently, but there hasn't also really been anything too different to what has been, I guess, the norm in terms of the content cycle for Siege. So it's not as if they've gone and done something quite different, maybe exciting that has brought people back. Do you just largely put this down to the general sentiment surrounding the game at the moment from the vibe of streamers and that kind of talking point that we've touched on in previous episode? Is that the biggest driving factor? Is it a matter of maybe other games having a bit of a lull and people coming back to Siege?
I think there's probably 2 big things that come to mind when I think about why is Siege seeing the growth in players that it is. The first, and it's the one that I see quite often on socials and stuff, and that is, the Jinxie effect and the content creators more generally now even, and we discussed this in a previous episode, the impact that they're having, I would assume, has been quite positive on player numbers, and we're seeing that now slowly be reflected. And the second point is probably a lull in other games. You think about where Call of Duty is, for instance, in its current cycle. When that comes out, are we then going to see a dip in Siege numbers? Perhaps. Battlefield is just absolutely shocking at the moment, so I'm sure we've taken some market share away from that. There does definitely feel like other shooters have sort of stagnated, whereas Siege, although the content cycle may have stagnated, it's been the same. I think in some ways that's actually been its saving grace, and it continues to be a consistent game that people can come back to, and where other titles may be faltering, Siege, generally speaking, doesn't make huge fuck ups and people respond positively to that.
It's a comfortable game, right? It doesn't change too much. You can have a break and you can come back in 6 months' time.
As long as it's not too long of a break, yeah.
Yeah, but you can kind of know what's going on, and the maps are typically similar. If there are reworks, they're not typically like massive reworks. It's not as if there's like 10 new maps when you come back. There's maybe just a handful. And I think that's a strength of Siege, but also when you think about it, as it could also be a negative down the road. If Siege comes in and Ubisoft are like, okay, next year we're going to do this massive update, we're going to overhaul a couple of these things, and people don't like that, that can actually drive a lot of the people away that do like Siege for what it is, that it is comfortable, it is ever sort of the same. So that is something where Ubisoft has got to be careful that they don't kind of get trapped into this self-esteem of like, all right, everyone's coming back and we haven't really done much, let's just keep that going. It's like, it's fine to innovate, but you've also got to make sure you do it in little amounts. And so which is where I think Ubisoft do quite well, to be honest. They never quite go absolutely too much in the wrong side of things where they try and overhaul, massive parts of the game. There are some segments where they go in and try and tinker with some things. And obviously recently the whole quick match debacle and dislike has been pretty clear from the community. So there are things that they do get wrong, but I think for the most part, the core game and for what you get typically stays the same, and therefore people can come back to it. And it also means that people can learn it when they're new to the game, and it's always kind of the same. So you've got a good 2, 3, 4 months to actually learn it without it evolving. Imagine you learn League, and then a whole new patch comes out, and all the champions are just go in a bloody washing machine and spit back out, and suddenly what you've learned on one champion maybe doesn't work anymore. That doesn't happen in Siege.
I guess that's also, probably to round out this conversation, the third point as to why we might be seeing positive growth in numbers and why I think longer term it may actually continue to grow or at least sustain, is Ubisoft have finally made a more conscious effort to onboard players in a more friendly manner with the things like challenges, now a dedicated tutorial, shit like that. Siege may have been a easier game to come back from after a short break, but it was never easy unless you were playing from like year 2 or 3 or before to jump into, because it is a deeply complex game with all the operators and all the maps and incredibly frustrating to learn. So I think that maybe that as well has helped bring people in, and they're sticking around. I don't know what the onboard numbers actually look like. You don't see that on the Steam charts. It's just total player count. We don't see the split of that's new, but an interesting talking point nonetheless.
And what you don't also see on the Steam charts is the console numbers as well, which from what I'm aware are absolutely massive for Siege. So Steam charts not the be end all. And yeah, obviously it's positive at the moment. It can't stay in the green forever. At some point, there'll be a little dip here and there. You'll see some red. The biggest thing for Siege and for Ubisoft is to not panic. It's obviously been around a long, long time now in terms of a game. And if you look at the Steam charts, you can see it goes through these peaks and goes through these cycles, and then it kind of drops a little bit again. So the biggest thing for them is to not try and be like, oh, we're losing a couple of these new numbers. Let's try and do something crazy. Just kind of keep it the same, and clearly it's working. So moving on to obviously what we presented last week, our new sort of segment, debates, hot topic segment. We've got 2 new questions for today, which I feel like these probably aren't as maybe a hot debate as last week. We'll see. We'll see.
You haven't seen me answer them yet.
Yeah, I haven't seen you answer them yet. So the first is the current Siege meta fun? Now, obviously, this is purely individualized question because it's based on your own opinion. I guess I'm asking this question to you specifically. Are you finding this current era of Siege fun?
Oh boy, this is going to be a controversial one, because I think there's going to be a lot of people that are split down the line. You have people that preferred what we call the utility meta, which was sort of 2019, 2020, slow build-ups from the attack. Jaeger was in his prime. Wamai was brought out. You'd have to spend most of the round dumping flashbangs and explosives into deployable shields to clear key positions. That was pretty much what the meta boiled down to. Now we've transitioned into what people are calling the TDM meta, where there's much more of a focus on gunplay, mechanics, isolated fights, roams, contact fights on entry. The dynamic has shifted quite a bit, and generally speaking, teams are playing far more aggressive and competitive. And as naturally is the case, that's now translated to ranked. You can't get away with being a hard support anymore. You can't get away with just playing, a catch operator and your job's done when you've set your util in the prep phase. You now need to be active and having an impact in the match. Which meta do I prefer? I like elements of both. They both have pros and cons. But I think purely from an entertainment perspective and an engagement perspective, whether it be as a player or an observer, I think the meta at the moment is better, and it's also more dynamic. You think about the old meta, yes, there was some innovation, but eventually one team somewhere would find, the most optimized util lineup setup. Everyone would then just copy it, and you'd just be watching the same thing. And it basically, the difference between the teams was just very minute synchronization things where you had to hit a trade here or there or whatever. Now, the meta is very much evolved. Teams are doing different setups. We're seeing all different kinds of different things, even on, stock standard maps. And I think for me, that's what I prefer. I know some people will say that it leans now too far into gunfights, but I think that's a very shallow perspective on the current meta, which does still, in my opinion, favor teams that are better synchronized, have better strategy, and in my eyes, play better Siege.
I think the current meta, and I guess this obviously is a question that goes two ways. It's both in-game and also from an esports perspective, because they're intertwined in that regard. In terms of a viewership perspective, Siege right now in its current state is probably the best it's ever been. I think it's the most fun Siege that you can potentially find. If you go back to 2019, Siege, that utility meta was boring. No one wanted to watch it. No one wanted to sit 2.5 minutes each round and watch that. 100%. Now, the current era of Siege is at least more focused on skill from players and so of what they can do, which means the individuals shine brighter, which is, I think, a massive positive. And we're talking about players as like these superstars and what they can bring to a team. It's the reason why you will go and see a Jigsaw will go and leave Australia and go to Koi. And because of what he's been able to shine. Now, if you take him back to 2019, util meta, and his role is to just clear key positions, he's not really playing to his full potential. So I think that the current meta of Siege and the way that it's playing is definitely the best it's been from an esports perspective. From an in-game perspective, I can definitely see why players probably feel like the core elements of original Siege are maybe missing.
Yeah.
100% get that. I think when you take Siege as a game, a video game, not as an esport, a competitive match, as a game, it's nothing as to what it was intended to be. You go back and watch those alpha footage, the super dark, stormy outside house, and they're rappelling in and all of that. The helicopter. It's nothing like that. It's a lot more brighter. It's a lot more, modern day. So... And that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. I think that original version of Siege probably would not have lasted. Evidently saw the numbers for it at the beginning and whatnot. So, but I think you can have elements. And I think the best you can eventually get is finding elements of the util meta, finding elements of the TDM meta, and going to a nice middle ground. I know that's the easiest take. That's the softest take. But I think that's the way that I would like to see the game go. I think you don't want to be too much into that TDM camp, but you also don't want to be too much into that util camp. So finding a nice middle ground, hopefully, what are we in 2023 now? Bloody hell. Maybe in the next 2 years, by 24, 25, we're talking about it being the best era of Siege because it is that middle ground. We'll have to wait and see if we do get there or not. Speaking of night maps and speaking of House at Night, that is our next sort of hot topic is should Siege have night maps again? Perfect segue. And I didn't plan it.
Yeah. Now... I'm sure most of our viewers are pretty hardcore, so they kind of know the lore behind this. But for those that don't, when Siege launched, pretty much every map, as far as I'm aware, had both a day variant and a night variant. As far as I remember, they were both playable in ranked as well, but someone can correct me on that. But at some point in 2018, eventually night maps were removed. I think Ubisoft cited that, it was taking away resources and also the gameplay element, because you have to think back to the old lighting system. The night maps, unless you are standing under a spotlight, it was so hard to spot opponents with dark skins in dark areas of the dark map.
Yep.
And it led to a lot of complaints and frustration. So eventually they were removed. Post that, the lighting has since been refreshed and refined and reworked, and it's a lot more standardized and easier to spot. And so that's why often when a lot of people say, I miss old Siege, or the elements that they miss of old Siege, a lot of people will cite night maps. And I kind of agree to an extent. I think that having night maps, even if it was just in quick match or unranked or whatever they're calling it now, or standard, would be a nice addition. Should they have a place in ranked and competitive? Probably not, because they're not the most optimized versions of those maps. But yeah, I think having night maps would be nice. The big asterisk on that then is how many resources does that take away? Every single patch, multiple bugs get patched on multiple maps. Now, someone, again, who's going to be far more knowledgeable than me can inform us, but I would hazard to guess that every time you edit a map, or most of the times when you edit a map, you then need to re-render it, relight it, do all kinds of shit like that. And if you then have to double that workload every single time you want to change a map, or even when you're developing a map, having to keep that in mind, that's going to probably take away a lot from the map makers and their ability to rework maps and create new maps. So it's going to be a trade-off. Would people prefer having night maps of the current maps, but then only have one rework a year or one new map a year, or expect map bugs to take longer to fix? Is that trade-off actually going to be worth it? I don't think so.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, because again, two ways you want to kind of look at this. And I think this question is not really an esports question at all, personally, because I think to make it pretty clear cut, in esports, it should just be day maps.
Yep.
You see that pretty much in like to Counter-Strike, for example, they're all day maps. So I think it's what you want. And for the game itself, yeah, I mean, obviously there's the logistical and obviously the hardware side of things. Is it actually feasible? Is it worth it? But I think, let's say in a world it is doable. Let's say in a world like the rendering or whatever is irrelevant. I think it's nice for like unranked, quick match, whatever. I think it would be kind of cool to be able to be like, oh, it's club, but it's at night, you know? And largely too, it's probably in the current state, and I think the current lighting for Siege probably isn't actually good enough for it. I'm thinking of like when I'm playing Counter-Strike 2, for example, and I know we reference it a lot, but the lighting that they've been able to introduce through Source 2, if you go into certain areas, like I'm just thinking like on Nuke, you go into vending, and the light, the way that it just comes off the vending machines and it like brightens up the room and illuminates it, I don't think Siege is capable of that. And I think that that's something you would probably need to really enhance a night version of these kind of maps. So I would only do it if Siege goes through a massive graphical overhaul. Like I'm talking new engine. That kind of massive. I'm not talking just tweaking textures.
You're pretty much saying if they're going to do it properly. Yep. Like we saw Favela come out, that's a night map.
And I hate that.
But it doesn't really have like that advanced technology to really bring it to life. Mm-hmm. And you have to think, right? Like this game is incredibly popular on console. You're not going to introduce night maps that are just going to crush console performance for, you know, a game that can be quite demanding, and they've optimized super well to run at like a constant 60 FPS. So yeah, I think it's going to take a lot of considerations. I don't think a lot of people think it's just as simple as just turning out the lights and you've got a night map. Like it would take a lot of effort and a lot of thought to put into it. And again, it's that trade-off. Yep. Would it be worth it? It'd be really cool. It would bring, you know, a lot of variance to the maps, and we already have a lot of maps. But I just don't want to detract from other aspects of the game.
Is it a Siege 2 thing? Like if Siege 2 is ever in the works and happens in, you know, say 3-4 years, is that something that like, okay, Siege 2, we've got a new engine, we've got, you know, obviously it's not going to be a Source engine or anything, but something akin to that. I don't know. You
whatever the in-house engine is.
Yeah, whatever it is. And then they can actually sort of match similar to the lighting that a lot of these other games are now starting to do with this new age technology. And if you think about what Siege 2 could eventually be, is by that point, because this would be years in the future, you're not talking about your PS4s and your Xbox Ones. You might not even be barely even talking about your PS5s.
Yeah.
Potentially. So that's the only world I envision it. I think it would be cool outside of ranked and outside of comp, but then that's a lot of hours for a small portion of the game. So I guess to sort of finalize on that, should Siege have night maps again? Not right now.
Maybe
in the future.
Yeah.
Maybe in the future. All right, moving on to our esports segment for the week. It's the week 3 power rankings and our topical conversations surrounding the action throughout the week, which has very slightly started to slow down a bit as some regions, of course, are qualifying. Obviously, we spoke about it last week. Japan and South Korea had both their 4 teams overall qualify for the major. And obviously this week we've got a couple of other leagues. I think like EUL has wrapped up their league.
We could talk about them first if you...
Yeah, we can go straight into EUL and straight into sort of the power rankings. And I think the return of BDS might be in full swing, Guzz.
Yeah, we've placed them in the S tier for this particular week, finishing top of their group. So they're now seated in that upper bracket semi. They'll take on M&M, who actually had a flawless run against Wild. I'm really looking forward to that game. I think M&M have showed really good promise. On the other side of the bracket, Wolves actually pushed to 3 maps against ITB, which was a little bit unexpected, and that's why they're only in the A tier. But for a position that they found themselves in, I think Wolves have handled themselves quite well. G2, unfortunately, did get knocked down a little bit. They've just tapered off a little bit at the end of this stage.
Yeah, do you sense that G2 are going to be able to make the major?
Ooh... That's a tough one. So, I mean, where did they finish in the group? So they finished 4th in the group. Does that mean they have to then make like an
LCQ,
like an LCQ run, open qual run? Yeah. So G2 open quals. Maybe they should have been put in F tier. I don't know, but yeah, that's going to be tough. I wouldn't put it past them. I mean, we saw it from the Wolves in stage 1, so it's certainly not impossible. There is precedent, but probably not a position I expected to see them in.
Yeah, I think that's been probably one of the biggest surprises from the EUL has been G2. Like, I don't consider BDS's return to being a bit of a powerhouse really a surprise. I think it was more of a surprise that they actually had sort of a bit
It's more
of
a
time.
matter of when was it going to happen.
I think they had a bit of time away and out of the spotlight. That in itself was sort of the surprise for them. So, yeah, very curious to sort of see how the playoffs do go for EUL. As always, I think one of the premier regions and continues to sort of shine through. And they've got good quality siege. Entertainment factor, not as good as OCE.
Yeah, I'll argue that till the cows come home. Jumping over to NAL then, which has completed their 7 play days as well. So they've now seeded their bracket. And again, much like last week, nothing huge has changed. It's still shaping up to be, a very close and competitive league. M80 took it out in the end, so whoop for me, because I think I put them at the top for my predictions. But they're still like a long way away from making the major, right? They're going to have to take down Wildcard, who beat Space Station 2-1. So they continue this Cinderella run throughout stage 2. There was obviously concerns that it might peter out throughout the bracket portion, now transitioning into best of 3s. Was SSG their toughest of opponents? Perhaps not. However, yeah, still a good result to get that over the line. And then on the top of the bracket as well, Sonics as well with a 2-0 victory. So they're returning to form. So things are looking good for our predictions. M80 and Sonics pretty much in the box seat to get at least 2 of the 3 slots.
I would imagine as great as a fairy tale as it's been for Wildcard, surely M80 is going to be just too good for them in that particular semi-final matchup. And I'm pretty sure it's if you go to the bracket final, you basically go to the major, right? Like, is that how it works for NAL and EUL? I'm pretty sure because they get the 3 slots. I'm assuming then it would just be battling off.
Top 2 teams qualify phase 2, third place for phase 1.
Cool. So they'd just be fighting for money.
It's just a prize money match. Yeah.
Cool. So basically, out of those 2, I want your predictions. Dark Zero Sonics, who wins that?
Dark Zero Sonics. I think that will be a Sonics 2-1, but that's going to be a very competitive game. I expect that game to be probably closer than M80 Wildcard. I could see M80 beating Wildcard 2-0, but if Wildcard just, again, have another crazy day and it seems to all connect, probably another 3-mapper, but I think M80 still edge out.
Yeah, I would probably agree with you there. I think Sonics and M80 will get through, and obviously then that leaves the phase 1 matchup between the other 2. So obviously for Oxygen and Space Station Gaming, pretty disappointing stage, all things considered, especially at least for one of them being basically overshadowed by Wildcard. Moving on from NAL though, and not too far away from that particular region though, we head down to the Brazilian region for, again, what's been a...
I got an AFL alert, my apologies.
For what's been a pretty topsy-turvy sort of stage. A lot of the big hitters that we thought coming into Brazil for this particular stage that would do well, and we thought it was maybe going to be top-heavy, has not been the case at all.
No. Liquid not finishing in the top 3. We have FaZe as well that just managed to squeeze through. They lost to Los Alamos. The game I don't think meant a whole lot in the context of that, but still a bit of a surprising performance. Maybe... I'll probably adjust the tier. I've got them down in like F at the moment. Maybe considering the context of the match, that's harsh, so I might change it. But I think the big result for me looking at this was the W7M game against E1. E1 have been playing out of their minds really here in stage 2 and doing a really good performance. Unfortunately though, W7M at the death. Going into that final day, they were 8-8. W7M though, they do squeeze through with a 7-5 regulation win. So they'll claim S tier for now. They get seeded in the second round of the bracket. And I think W7M, NIP, as the seeding suggests, are very much a good shout for making the major. I think that third slot, though, is really opened up here in Brazil. And I wouldn't be shocked if E1 are able to actually make a bit of a run here. I think they can take down FaZe, and NIP could potentially be a close game as well. If not, I still see them in the LBF to have an effort as well.
You've got lost one in the B tier, but they've been knocked out of groups. They're not even in the playoffs.
They beat FaZe. Maybe that was overestimating.
But this is the thing, though. I think it's almost like, okay, so obviously pre this stage, beating FaZe, that's amazing. You get big points for that. But FaZe right now being beaten by a lot of teams anyway.
True.
That's why they're in the quarterfinals. They'll take on E1. I think E1 probably at this stage going as favourites for that. They've been playing better in the stage. The question is, for my mind, can FaZe get back to their pre-stage 2 form? Can they get back to their stage 1 form? If they do, they should have enough to beat E1 and even then potentially NIP. But I feel like this is the time for NIP. I had them kind of high up in my in my rankings at the start of this stage, and so far they're proving that they've got what it takes. They're straight into the semi-final. W7M should get a very clean run, I would imagine. They've been arguably the best from the region. No surprises from them, and obviously extremely disappointed from Liquid that they weren't even able to make the playoffs. So Liquid lost one, very disappointing. FaZe also very disappointing. So from those three teams, and I do wonder then, how do you want to frame it? Is it just the matter of a very strong region continues to get stronger, or is it the top teams in the region have fallen back into the pack a little bit? We won't know that question though until we get to the major and see how they're all performing. Very quick little minor update, I guess, over towards Japan.
Major update.
Well, major update. We did speak about it last week in terms of the
because they qualified for the major.
The qual, yeah. But we touched on that last week.
No,
we just touched on the semi-final, and yeah, that was it, right? The matchups.
The game was played on September 17, so yeah, we would have actually touched on it.
Yeah, we did touch on it.
I'm throwing.
That's all right, mate.
Yeah, I mean, there's not really too much to touch on for Japan. South Korea, I presume, is pretty much the same as well, right?
Yeah, D+ and C+. Although we did have the grand final play out.
True.
So, and which actually, and I remember talking about it last week, saying that that's going to be a very intriguing grand final because D+ started the stage very slow, and then they've just built up a nice little bit of momentum.
They're peaking.
They peaked at the right time, and they've knocked off Sandbox in the grand final. And that's actually a big thing because that sends them straight to phase 2. So they don't have to play phase 1 now. That was a game where both of the two teams would have given it their all. 7-5, 8-7, 7-2, smashing on Chalet, with a lot of that also being on the defense. That's a big result for D+, and I think really sort of highlights why you don't want to get too miscued by the early stage results. Play day 1, week 1, those results, not irrelevant, but don't put all your eggs in the basket of caring too much about those results.
Yeah, I mean, that's very impressive for D+. The question now will be, can they actually have an impact in phase 2? I mean, that's always very difficult to predict from the APAC region. We'll move on now to Asia, which has shaped up to be quite intriguing as well. Again, combination of SEA and SA. We had the top two teams battle it out in Bleed and Fury in a match that unfortunately didn't mean anything really because they're going to get seated on opposite sides of the bracket regardless. However, inside of the server, both teams took it quite seriously, and Bleed brought their aggression to the table. They didn't overstep the mark. They respected their opponents for a lot of the match, but they looked much better.
Yeah, I'm happy to go on statement here, but I think Bleed will get out of phase 1 at the major. And that's probably not like the biggest of hot takes. The way that they're playing, what they should have arguably done back in stage 1, I think when you look at this Bleed roster, you look at the way that they're playing, and they get to play together in their gaming house or whatever it is over there. So I think they've got that really good synergy. It's not a case of like, Bliss where they all play at home and then they go to the gaming house at Bliss and they turn to shit. So I think for me, from what is, I guess, considered the old APAC South region, Bleed's the best hope of getting out of phase 1, going to phase 2. And I think Fury, I'm not saying that they can't do that, because I imagine they will be at the major as well.
Yep.
I just don't have the same faith as I do in Bleed. And maybe that's a bit strange, considering Fury did go to Copenhagen, and Bleed obviously did not. But just from what I'm seeing from Bleed, and arguably Bleed should have gone in stage 1. They were arguably the best team. They went undefeated until the playoffs. Everything was about Bleed, Bleed, Bleed. They lost, and maybe it was the loss they had to have to really nail home some learnings, because there were some cases back in stage 1 where they didn't always take certain games seriously. They did like to have some fun, and then when the going got tough, it got tough, and they weren't able to respond. And I don't see that in them now. They take every game seriously. They try and smash everyone. They've been doing that. Best team in the region, and there's maybe an argument for best team in APAC. I don't know who else you would really rank higher than them. If you do, there's arguments.
Yeah, I think that's a bit of a hot take, but actually, yeah, pretty hot. It's not lukewarm. I would agree.
Unfortunately, we don't get like an APAC land to really test that theory, and we're not too sure if they'll even get to play against like sort of other APAC regions. Obviously, there'll be the likes from Japan and whatnot that you would say, okay, maybe they're a bit better, but I think what Bleed have over the other APAC teams, the ability to attack and defend, to do it on both sides. Maybe in Japan, they defend a bit better, but attacking, not so sure. So we'll see. Either way, looking forward to see what they do at the major, provided they get there. Hopefully no more chokes from them. If they choke the playoffs again, I swear to God, I am going to be pissed.
Yeah. In terms of the rest of how they've shaped up, No Cap got the last laugh against Elevate in that little grudge match. And in fact, we've also rated them above Direwolves as well. So Direwolves, Elevate, disappointing. And it's pretty difficult to envision either of those being able to topple Fury or Bleed. Even No Cap, I think, is a bit of a stretch. And then from South Asia, Shaheen's Hunters by far and away spearheading that region at the moment. Still only just in B tier and probably generously so. Again, it's so hard to see them having much of an impact in this bracket.
Yeah.
And we are going to talk about South Asia.
For all the bad reasons.
For all the bad reasons, unfortunately, in our Patreon exclusive content. So make sure to subscribe if you want to hear us moan and complain.
Yeah.
Because
this one might get us in trouble a little bit, to be completely honest. We've got to be a bit careful, but it is on the Patreon, not on the more, public channel, if I will. But yeah, it's been... And for anyone that's probably watched the region have probably been able to see sort of the issues. And it's not even just on production side of things, but also just like the region itself, the games themselves. So yeah, we'll kind of dive deeper into that in the Patreon. Should get a little bit spicy. If you do want to come and watch and support, obviously we've got the Patreon link down below. Yeah, to sort of wrap that up, I will say No Cap is the one to keep an eye on as the dark horse. If they're going to upset anyone, it's Fury. The question is, what side of the bracket will they be on? Will they get onto Fury's side of the bracket if they finish third? Surely, right? It has to be third is on the same side as Fury's side.
I don't know.
It has to
I'm
be.
not an admin.
I'm pretty sure it is the same as stage one. We could look at that. I can't be bothered though, so we'll wait and see how that all pans out. To close, OCE, of course, had their games last week, and as is always the case, we film on the day of
So it's a bit out of
the week, so it's always a little bit tricky, but some really fascinating games last week, guys.
Yeah, well, not really for us. We casted the 2-7-1s, so a bit one-sided. But Bliss returned to form, and the big discussion point around Bliss was, will they play better when they're back at home? Answer, yes. Had that funny little moment with Oda on the desk where he's like, to everyone talking shit like me. And then I got on the mic and said, just win a game when you're away from home. And yeah, so that was a funny little moment. But expecting Bliss to probably continue that run of form. The big thing for me is we're shaping up for the stage to end in such a way now with the delayed play day because of the server issue.
Yeah.
Bliss Triple R again could still be the major qualification game. And I could be wrong, but I've checked the rulebook multiple times. The head-to-head or the differential, the tiebreaker is round differential, then head-to-head. Now, Bliss, because of their close games previously, they would... If things stay the same, they need to win that game in regulation because they're trailing by 2 points. If that goes to OT, irrespective of what happens from there, Triple R win that and have the round differential. I mean,
yeah, I think you could bring the standings up here going into this week's playday. Now, obviously, last week we only had the one playday because of the server issues, but you can see just evidently how close it is. From 1st to 7th, there's only 5 points separating teams. And the biggest one is the round differential between Triple R, Bliss, and Carlton's Knights is 7, 7, and 6. So, yeah, if it is round differential first, that's something to keep in mind. You need to be winning your games comfortably. And that's probably going to be a talking point from this week on. I think we'll sort of touch on that on the broadcast because it's one thing to win. But, yeah, obviously for Bliss as well, if Triple R don't drop any games, then they will have to win.
They just need 6 rounds and they're through.
Yeah, so they'll have to win in regulation. Either way, the biggest thing moving forward is who's going to cause upsets along the way now, because I'm starting to lose a little bit of faith in the likes of Aerial Arise, your Odiums. Are they going to be able to get points off of Triple R, Bliss, Carlton's Knights, those kind of matches? So we'll have to wait and see. I mean, to be fair, again, we only had the one game. The one play day last week, and on that play day we had probably the biggest game of the stage thus far, the 8-7 Triple R versus Oceania.
Mate, I reckon we could do a whole podcast episode around that little moment. And I know we're a little bit pressed for time, so I won't go too far into it, but we had arguably the biggest rivalry, the biggest beef in the region. Comes down to a fucking 1v1 and Logic hits an ace to win the round, the map. Honestly, like, I kid you not, probably the craziest storyline and round I have ever seen.
I would recommend for anyone that doesn't watch the Oceania League, go back and watch the ending of that game.
I'll link it.
Between Triple R and Odium. At least watch the overtime segment part of it until the end. You could probably skip the regulation stuff if you want to save some time, but it was still a very impressive game. Obviously for Odium, heartbreak that they lost that, because that means they probably cannot go to the major now. That it would just take some monumental upsets. And if we kind of look ahead to the schedule for, at least for today and tomorrow, Carlton's Knights versus Odeon, what a banging match to start with. Mammoth versus Aerial Rise, another good test, I think, for Mammoth and sort of their rise this stage. Bandits Triple R should be just fodder for Triple R. And then Bliss versus Desire should be just, Bliss fodder as well. So we kind of got the shit games again today. For tomorrow, though, Carlton's Knights Triple R, finally we get something nice there between those two. And that's a big one because I remember we did our panel rankings and you had Carlton's Knights at the 2% chance to cause an upset along the way. I actually had them as a 2% chance to make the major. And so far, I think we're both right. And I think, again, that's a danger game for Triple R tomorrow.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, everyone watching is going to already know the result when,
that's true.
when this comes up. So, yeah, obviously shaping up to be entertaining. And, I think Bliss is still in the best position alongside Triple R. So it's basically down to those two.
Yeah, certainly is. We'll wrap that up there. And I think with that, we might actually just look to wrap the episode up as well because we've made pretty good time. There's a couple of other things that we maybe wanted to touch on that, once again, we can maybe save for next week, which is always good, helps us out. And the other thing that helps us out as well is, of course, all of our Patreon subscribers. Big shout out to them who have, of course, given us their hard-earned money to help us continue to operate and put these shows out. It's been obviously amazing. We're through 8 episodes. And very quickly as well, I've left this until the end, but I am going to be doing a giveaway coming up, and I maybe
even I didn't know about this.
Maybe already it could be up, and I maybe get you to put it up on the screen if I have posted it. We've got a couple of R6 credit codes to give away. It'll be a pretty stock standard. Follow all the socials and all of that. So for those watching along, and for those I guess who make it to this point in the episode, you guys get sort of first notification of that will be going up. So make sure to stay involved with all of the socials at Jake and Guzz, pretty much across everything, and we'll hopefully get you guys some goodies. But that's going to wrap up episode number 8. If you want to subscribe to the Patreon, link down below, because now we're going to go there and talk about some South Asia shenanigans. Should be a lot of fun. But until next episode, for everyone watching along at home, for all our public viewers, thank you so much for all of your support. Make sure you hit the subscribe button, and we'll see you in episode 9.